Silence is never empty. It only looks that way from the outside. When you choose no contact, the world assumes you are waiting, punishing, or trying to prove something. But what truly begins in that space has nothing to do with control. It is far more unsettling than anger. It is the sudden removal of emotional gravity. At first, he feels relief. This part is rarely discussed. The phone is quiet. No questions, no emotional requests, no expectations to meet. His nervous system exhales. He tells himself this distance is good, necessary, even healthy, and for a brief moment, he believes it. But silence does not stay neutral for long. Because what you removed was not conversation, it was regulation. You were the emotional reference point, the familiar presence that unconsciously stabilized his inner world. When that disappears, the psyche does not celebrate. It destabilizes. This is when withdrawal begins, not yours, his. Carl Jung once observed that when an external object carrying emotional meaning is removed, the unconscious reacts before the conscious mind understands why. And this is exactly what happens during no contact. His mind tells him he is fine. His body disagrees. Sleep becomes lighter. Focus fragments. Old memories surface without invitation. He replays conversations he once dismissed. Not because he suddenly became sentimental, but because silence has created a vacuum, and the psyche always tries to fill what is missing. This is the first shock men don't expect. They assume silence will freeze emotions. Instead, it concentrates them. Without your presence to absorb, soothe, or respond, his internal tension has nowhere to go. What once leaked outward now turns inward. Irritation appears without a clear source. Restlessness replaces certainty. The ego, so used to having access, begins to feel something dangerously unfamiliar: displacement. And here is the quiet truth. He does not miss you yet. He misses how he felt when you were there. This is crucial. No contact does not immediately trigger longing. It triggers imbalance, a subtle loss of orientation, the feeling that something has shifted, but without language. Jung would say the shadow has been activated, not the dramatic kind, but the uneasy awareness that control was an illusion. You did not disappear to punish him. You disappeared, and his inner structure began to reorganize. And this reorganization is uncomfortable, because silence does not argue. Silence does not explain. Silence does not reassure. Silence simply reflects. And in that reflection, a man begins, slowly, unwillingly, to feel the weight of what is no longer stabilizing him. This is where the process truly begins. After the initial imbalance settles, something more unsettling begins to surface. The mind starts searching for anchors. At this stage, he still tells himself the story that silence is mutual, temporary, or insignificant. He fills the gap with logic, work, distractions, routine. Men are particularly skilled at this phase, converting emotional disturbance into activity. Gym sessions become longer, evenings become louder, days become fuller, but none of it reaches the core, because no contact does not attack the surface of a man's life. It bypasses it. What quietly emerges now is emotional withdrawal, a state most men have never learned to recognize in themselves. It feels like irritability without cause, a low-grade tension in the body, a sense of being off without being able to name why. This is the phase where he becomes unusually sensitive to reminders. A song, a familiar place, a phrase that sounds like your voice in his head. And this is important. These triggers are not romantic. They are destabilizing. They intrude. They interrupt his attempt to move on cleanly. Silence has not allowed closure. It has suspended resolution. In Jung's view, when a psychic bond is broken externally but not integrated internally, the unconscious compensates through repetition. This is why he replays moments he once minimized, why small details grow louder over time. The psyche is trying to digest a loss the ego refuses to acknowledge. And so the withdrawal deepens. He may feel unusually tired, yet restless, detached, yet emotionally reactive, calm on the surface, agitated underneath. This contradiction confuses him because men are often taught to associate emotional pain with visible sadness. But withdrawal does not always look like grief. Sometimes it looks like emptiness. And emptiness is far harder to tolerate because emptiness offers no one to blame. Silence has done something critical here. It has removed friction. There is no argument to push against, no emotional energy to react to, no reassurance to reject. Without resistance, the psyche turns inward. This is when self-questioning begins, not consciously, but instinctively. He starts to wonder why your absence feels heavier than expected, why life feels flatter, even when nothing is wrong, why distractions no longer fully distract. And still, he does not reach out. Not yet, because this phase is about preservation. The ego is trying to maintain dignity, control, and narrative. Reaching out would require admitting that silence is affecting him, and that admission feels like loss of power. So instead, he withdraws further into himself. This is the paradox most women never see. Your silence does not pull him toward you immediately. It pulls him away from himself. And that inner distance is far more uncomfortable than missing someone. Because now, without realizing it, he is experiencing the early symptoms of emotional withdrawal, the kind that occurs not when love ends, but when regulation disappears. The psyche has begun to feel the absence. The ego has not caught up yet. And that delay is where the real transformation quietly builds. Now something subtle and far more destabilizing takes place. He begins to feel the absence of influence. Not your voice, not your messages, but your effect. Before no contact, his emotional state shifted in response to you, even when he denied it. Your presence grounded, softened, or stimulated parts of him he rarely accessed alone. When that influence vanishes, he doesn't feel lonely. He feels unregulated. This is where many men make a critical mistake. They assume discomfort means boredom, so they seek stimulation. New conversations feel briefly energizing, then oddly flat. Attention from others lands, but doesn't settle. Pleasure becomes noisier, not deeper. And after the distraction fades, the unease returns, stronger, more persistent. Because silence has not removed desire. It has removed familiarity. And the nervous system reacts poorly to that loss. Internally, a comparison process begins, not consciously, but instinctively. Other connections feel lighter, easier, less demanding, and yet somehow less real. He cannot explain it, so he doesn't try. He just feels dissatisfied without knowing why. This is emotional withdrawal in its most confusing form. Not pain, not longing, but disorientation. His inner world no longer mirrors itself the way it used to. And when the psyche loses a familiar emotional mirror, it starts searching for it everywhere. This is when curiosity quietly turns toward you, not as a decision, as a reflex. He wonders how you're doing, not enough to ask, but enough to imagine. He checks without checking, remembers without wanting to. Silence has made you psychologically present without being available. And this is where no contact does its deepest work, because you are no longer participating in the emotional loop. No reassurance, no reaction, no emotional feedback, which means his internal experience becomes his responsibility. This is the moment many men don't expect, the moment when absence stops feeling like distance and starts feeling like exposure. There is nothing external to blame the discomfort on, no argument to justify it. No response to provoke, just him, with himself. And that is precisely what destabilizes the old dynamic. Because when a woman stops regulating a man's emotional world, even unconsciously, he is forced to encounter parts of himself he avoided through connection. This is not where longing peaks. This is where awareness begins. And awareness, once activated, cannot be undone. Awareness does not arrive gently. It arrives as friction. Now he starts noticing what he can no longer access. Not emotionally, instinctively. The ease with which he once assumed you would be there. the quiet certainty that connection existed whether he tended to it or not. That certainty is gone, and this is where emotional withdrawal crosses an invisible threshold. Because the mind can tolerate absence, but the nervous system reacts to loss of availability. He begins to feel a strange tension around control, not in the sense of dominance, but predictability. Silence has removed his ability to anticipate your reactions, your presence, your emotional position. And unpredictability is deeply unsettling to the psyche. This is when the urge to check appears, not to reconnect, to reorient. He may replay scenarios in his head, wondering what you might be thinking. He imagines reaching out, not to say something meaningful, but to restore a familiar emotional rhythm, to see if the dynamic still exists, to confirm he still occupies space in your inner world. And when he doesn't act on that impulse, the withdrawal intensifies. Because impulses denied do not disappear, they turn inward. This is the stage where men often describe feeling off or disconnected without linking it to you. Their ego resists that connection. It feels safer to label the discomfort as stress, burnout, or restlessness. But the timing tells the truth. Silence has shifted the balance. In Jung's view, when an unconscious dependency is disrupted, the psyche enters a compensatory phase. It tries to restore equilibrium, not through insight, but through action. This is why some men suddenly become hyperactive, impulsive, or emotionally reactive during no contact. They are not moving forward. They are regulating withdrawal. And here is the paradox most never expect. Your silence begins to feel louder than your presence ever was. Because presence could be negotiated. Silence cannot. There is nothing to argue with, nothing to push against, nothing to dismiss. Only the growing realization that something meaningful is no longer accessible on demand. This is when emotional withdrawal stops being vague discomfort and starts becoming personal. Not as longing yet, but as loss of leverage. And loss of leverage forces reflection, whether he wants it or not. He begins, quietly, unwillingly, to recognize that what disappeared was not just communication. It was emotional safety. And once that awareness enters the psyche, the process can no longer be reversed, only completed. This is the stage where the emotional withdrawal becomes undeniable, even to him. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but persistent. He starts feeling a quiet pressure in the chest, a mental looping he can't switch off. Thoughts return when he least expects them, in stillness, not chaos. The silence you created has done something precise. It removed emotional anesthesia. Before, if discomfort arose, there was always an outlet. A message, a reaction, a sense of connection, even if imperfect. Now, nothing buffers the internal experience, and the psyche reacts. He begins to feel emotionally exposed, not to you, but to himself. This is when guilt subtly enters the picture, though he may never name it that way. Not guilt for what he did, but for what he didn't tend to. The places he assumed would remain unchanged. The emotional access he treated as permanent. In Jung's language, this is the ego encountering the consequences of unconscious entitlement. When something valuable is lost without ceremony, the shadow doesn't rage, it whispers. He asks himself questions he avoided before. Why does this feel heavier than expected? Why can't I just move on cleanly? Why does silence feel like a verdict, even when no words were spoken? And here's what matters most. He now understands, on a bodily level, that something ended. Not the connection, the dynamic. This is where men experience withdrawal symptoms they were never taught to recognize. A sudden sensitivity to rejection, irritation at minor frustrations, a desire for reassurance they refuse to ask for, a strange pull toward the past without nostalgia. These symptoms don't point outward, they point inward, because no contact did not remove love. It removed emotional dependency, and dependency, once broken, reveals how much regulation was outsourced. At this stage, reaching out becomes tempting, but dangerous to the ego. Because reaching out now would not be casual. It would be revealing. It would expose the fact that silence changed him. So he waits. And waiting amplifies everything. This is when silence finishes its deepest work, not by forcing action, but by dissolving illusion. The illusion that he was unaffected. The illusion that you were replaceable. The illusion that emotional access was guaranteed. And from this point on, whatever happens next, contact or none, will never come from the same psychological place again. This is the phase where the internal narrative breaks. Up until now, he could still tell himself a story. This is temporary. This is manageable. This is my choice. But silence has outlasted explanation, and duration changes meaning. What once felt like distance now feels like finality, even without confirmation. Not because you declared an ending, but because the psyche interprets sustained absence as reality, not strategy. This is when emotional withdrawal turns into emotional reckoning. He begins to sense that if contact returns, it will not restore what existed before. Something fundamental has shifted, and that realization carries weight. Because it introduces risk, the risk that re-entry would expose him to judgment, consequence, or loss of position. Silence has removed his advantage. Before, he could approach when it suited him, retreat when it didn't, assume continuity without responsibility. Now, every imagined message carries uncertainty. Will you respond? Will you be the same? Will he be? This uncertainty paralyzes. So instead of action, the psyche deepens reflection. He starts reviewing the relationship not emotionally, but structurally. Who initiated? Who adapted? Who maintained emotional flow? Who benefited from stability without offering it back? These thoughts are uncomfortable because they threaten self-image. And this is where many men feel something close to grief without recognizing it as such. Not grief for losing you, grief for losing access. In Jungian psychology, when a projection is withdrawn, when the other no longer carries parts of the self, the individual must retrieve those qualities internally or suffer fragmentation. That retrieval process is not gentle. It feels like emptiness, followed by pressure to grow. And growth is never neutral. He may feel smaller for a while, less certain, less dominant in his inner world. Silence has equalized the emotional field, and that equality feels like loss to an ego accustomed to leverage. This is also when pride and longing collide. He wants relief, but not at the cost of self-exposure. He wants connection, but not vulnerability. He wants resolution, but without accountability. Silence offers none of that. It simply holds the mirror. And the longer the mirror remains, the harder it becomes to deny what it reflects. By now, one truth has settled deep in his body, even if he has no words for it. No contact did not weaken you. It changed him. And that change cannot be undone, only integrated. This is the point where outcomes diverge. But the internal shift? That has already happened. At this point, silence begins to change its function. It is no longer absence. It becomes pressure, not the kind that demands action, but the kind that reshapes identity. He starts noticing a shift in how he relates to power. Before, power lived in options, distance, detachment. Now, detachment feels hollow. Options feel thinner. Distance no longer feels like freedom, it feels like loss of position. This is when many men experience a quiet anxiety they cannot explain. Not panic, not desperation, but a subtle sense that something valuable moved beyond reach without asking permission. And what unsettles him most is this. You did not collapse. Silence did not weaken you. It clarified you. In the unconscious, this lands as a threat, not because you disappeared, but because you stabilized without him. The psyche registers this immediately. The old dynamic depended on your availability, your emotional openness, your responsiveness. Now, none of that is visible, and what cannot be seen cannot be controlled. This is where emotional withdrawal transforms into self-comparison. He starts measuring himself against the version of you he imagines now. Calmer, quieter, less reactive. He doesn't know if that image is accurate, but it doesn't matter. The psyche responds to perceived evolution as reality, and that perception destabilizes hierarchy. He begins to feel something unfamiliar. Emotional inferiority. Not consciously. Somatically, it shows up as hesitation, as second-guessing, as a reluctance to initiate anything that could expose him to indifference. Because indifference, unlike rejection, offers no leverage. This is the stage where the fantasy of reaching out someday loses comfort. Because someday now carries risk. You might not respond the way you used to. You might not need what he offers. You might not want to reopen what you closed internally. And this realization does something profound. It forces accountability, not outwardly, but inwardly. He begins to see that silence was not a tactic. It was a boundary, and boundaries shift power without explanation. This is when no contact completes its psychological arc. Not by pulling him toward you, but by pulling him into himself. Whatever he chooses from here, to reach out, to stay silent, to move on, it will no longer come from the same unconscious position. The dynamic that once defined the connection has dissolved. And once a dynamic dissolves, it cannot be revived, only replaced. Silence didn't close the door. It changed the room. And he feels it, even if he never says a word. What follows next is not urgency, it is integration. The nervous system begins adapting to the new emotional climate. The sharp edges of withdrawal soften, but the imprint remains. Silence has rewired expectation. He no longer assumes access. He no longer assumes relevance. An assumption, once broken, never fully returns. This is where many men mistake adaptation for healing. He tells himself he's adjusted, that life feels normal again, that the discomfort has passed. But what actually happened is quieter. The psyche has reorganized around the absence instead of resisting it. And that reorganization has consequences. He becomes more cautious with attachment, less careless with emotional bonds, or, in some cases, more avoidant, doubling down on control to avoid repeating the destabilization he experienced. In Jungian terms, this is where the complex either integrates or hardens. Carl Jung believed that unresolved emotional ruptures do not disappear. They sink into the unconscious and influence future behavior. And this is why no contact continues working long after silence ends. Even if he never reaches out, even if you never speak again, the imprint remains. He now associates emotional withdrawal not with freedom, but with consequence, with disorientation, with the unsettling realization that connection is not guaranteed and absence has weight. This subtly changes how he approaches future intimacy. He may hesitate sooner, attach more slowly, or, paradoxically, seek reassurance where he once withheld it, because his nervous system learned something it didn't know before. Silence can destabilize him, and this knowledge reshapes identity, not dramatically, but permanently. No contact does not always bring someone back, but it always brings something forward. Truth, awareness, limits. And that is why its effect cannot be undone by time or distraction. The connection may be gone, but the psychological lesson remains. And that lesson follows him, long after the silence ends. Now comes the quiet aftermath, the phase almost no one talks about. Because this is not about him anymore. This is about what silence did to you. While his psyche was destabilizing, recalibrating, and resisting, something entirely different was happening on your side. No contact did not hollow you out. It returned your emotional energy to its rightful place. At first, the silence may have felt unnatural, too spacious, too still, but gradually, your nervous system adjusted, not to absence, but to self-containment. You stopped reaching outward to regulate what was never yours to manage alone. And this is where the deepest shift occurred. You no longer needed a response to feel grounded. You no longer measured your worth through reaction. You no longer interpreted silence as rejection. This is individuation in motion. As Jung described it, individuation begins the moment a person withdraws projections from the outside world and reclaims them inwardly. You stopped projecting stability, reassurance, and meaning onto him. And in doing so, you reclaim them for yourself. This is why no contact feels different once it completes its cycle. You don't feel triumphant. You don't feel vindicated. You feel clear. And clarity is the most irreversible state of all. From this place, something subtle but powerful changes in how you relate to men, not just him. You stop chasing emotional confirmation. You stop negotiating for presence. You stop mistaking intensity for depth. And whether he returns or not becomes almost secondary, because the version of you that existed before silence, the one who adapted, waited, hoped, and absorbed, no longer exists. And this is the final shock men never expect. That no contact doesn't just change how they feel, it changes who you become. And once that transformation completes, silence is no longer a tactic. It's a threshold, and you have already crossed it. What remains now is not silence. It is truth. No contact ends long before words ever return. It ends the moment illusion dissolves. When neither of you can unknow what was revealed. When the nervous system has learned a lesson the mind can no longer override. For him, the lesson was this: emotional access is not permanent. Presence is not guaranteed. And silence has consequences. For you, the lesson was deeper. You learn that your stability does not depend on being chosen in real time. That your worth does not fluctuate with response. That love does not require self-erasure to survive. This is the final transformation. Because once silence completes its work, you do not return to who you were before. You become someone who no longer confuses attachment with intimacy or longing with connection. And this is why, if he ever reaches out again, it feels different. Not because he changed first, but because you did. You listen without leaning forward. You respond without abandoning yourself. You observe without urgency. Silence has taught you discernment. And discernment is the quietest form of power. In Jung's view, the psyche matures when it no longer seeks completion through the other, but meets the other from wholeness. That is where you stand now. Not closed, not hardened, but complete. No contact was never about withdrawal. It was about reclamation. You reclaimed your energy, your emotional center, your authority over your inner world. And the most unexpected outcome of all, you no longer need silence to protect you, because you no longer abandon yourself to be heard. This is where the story ends. Not with reunion, not with loss, but with alignment. And that alignment will shape every connection that follows.